So in this film, we're going to be doing a quick review of a live session that we did a while back where we were looking at 10 ideas that you could introduce into your boudoir photography. So the concept was 10 simple ideas in half an hour, live of course as well, which we like to do. But it was so that anybody of any kind of level of boudoir photography could get something out of it and possibly put it into their kind of everyday photography. So the 10 shots or the 10 ideas, first of all, we kicked off with a window. I'm an absolutely lover of window light, and obviously if you have the ability to shoot with just daylight the majority of the time, depends where in the world you kind of operate from. In sunny wet Wales, as it were, we're obviously limited not only with the amount of hours in a winter month, but also in a working year. We've got quite wet weather and so on with it, so we can't guarantee. So for me, using the window light kind of demonstrates having to rack up the ISO perhaps. I like to shoot quite wide open, usually around about 2.8 to 4 maximum, f2.8 or f4 maximum. I can open up to 1.4 as well if I want to, 1.2 with a certain lens, but as a rule I try and actually keep the plane so I've got good depth of focus as well. We opted to quickly go for a detachable skirt. So this is actually like a little bit of a tutu skirt that you can buy quite quickly and cheaply online, and it's a good thing to have in studio. We used it for the majority of the shoot. The reason being is we were live, and obviously in YouTube, not quite knowing the camera angles as far as video was concerned and what YouTube would see and so on with it. So for us, body is always turned away from the light source. I've got to be honest, in review, which is this is about, the arm closest to the window, it's too straight. There's a kind of a technique that I try and encourage everybody to do is, the idea of if it bends, you bend it. So you bend a head, a neck, a shoulder, a hip, a leg, a knee, an ankle, a wrist, a finger, and so on. In this case, I've followed nothing of what I recommend, at least on the arm is concerned. So if the hand that is dropped down or the arm that is dropped down had some little bend in it, it would be a lot more feminine, and the muscle at the top of the arm wouldn't be as pronounced as well with it and things really. Obviously using the likes for liquefying, we could tone that down a little bit more. Am I worried about the burning out of the tone? No, because pretty much the majority of what I shoot is in black and white anyway. I thought we'd kind of see the kind of colour images so you get an idea of the colour tone throughout the photographs compared to the shoot, as it were. But yeah, Kelsey, who was our studio model, we used quite a lot for many years and things really. She's great. We can put her in position. She even knows some of my kind of sayings and poses off by heart and things. But yeah, it's a nice simple image to get going. Notice the hand just actually finger and thumb, or the fingers in the middle and the thumb, just to actually grasp onto the strap. And again, just easy enough to flow. I usually do bend this front leg and I'll crop off just above the knee. The reason that I have the front leg, or the leg nearest to camera position, bent is to cover the groin a little bit. And I kind of, if you pose the client from the toe to the head, and you kind of think, well, if they were shooting a family portrait, this pose will thin them. If it's a boudoir image, it'll thin them. If it was a nude, it would thin them as well with it and things. So that's where I try and keep to. Second shot was introducing a mirror, and if you watched the film, you heard me having a bit of a laugh because Brandon forgot to polish the actual mirror. We did do it, I promise you, but you'd never guess from here and things. But we just kind of whipped one of the wardrobe doors off from the changing room. We brought it in to add a little bit of depth. I've got to be honest, it's not something that I've shot a lot with. We have done similar, in fact, and laid the subject down on it, so we actually get a mirror reflection, which works out pretty good. But I do like the three-dimensional element. I think especially if you're working in a small studio space, using the likes of a mirror to give you an extra 3-dimension can really work well, because if it was reflecting, or you're trying to get some different element into your portrait, even if it wasn't reflecting Kelsey in the mirror and it was reflecting a scene or a stand or a chair or something just out of shot and things, really, it's a good way for you to kind of give an extra dimension to the portrait anyway. Symmetry wise, I used a kind of a Dutch tilt. That means the camera is purposely at an angle rather than a lazy tilt, which we all do sometimes, and it feels like the older I get, the more I do it. But this is a purpose Dutch tilt, comes from the Flemish painters, of course. Yeah, just a real simple boho kind of animation, something doing with the hair rather than doing with the actual lingerie. So it could actually be stimulative, not of a boudoir shoot. In fact, it could be just a portrait where the client's got a lovely kind of cocktail dress or whatever it is and things, really. So yeah, that works pretty well. Metering all the time from the nose to the light source. Yeah, that gives me the exposure for the beautiful skin tone throughout. And obviously when you're working with daylight and you're very close to a window anyway, you are going to get some dappled light perhaps that is going to touch onto the subject. The only thing that you've got to decide on whether it is really detracting so much from the shot you're not going to do it. So I wouldn't kind of put this image into awards and competitions with the likes of the dappled light on it, because obviously, you know, a judge is going to look at it and go, well, it's a shame you didn't control the light a little bit more, diffuse it down, or even move the subject to the other side. But I do like kind of the use of strong sunlight in portraiture, especially if you've got the ability. Perhaps it's because we don't get much sun. So anytime it comes out, you kind of use it instead of complaining about it and things, really. But using a mirror is a really good idea. And we even kind of began to explore using a very small mirror, of course. You might have seen me do that quite a lot. With the strong sunlight coming through the window itself, we can use the mirror light to actually light the subject from a distance. So if they're in a dark area of the corner, near the window, we could use a small mirror to actually add a little pop of light actually into the face or onto the body. So mirror use was that one. The room set, in fact, we'd had delivered to us the new Elinchrom One. It's not so much new anymore. They've got the Elinchrom 5 now as well, which is a portable but TTL studio flash. So it can be plugged into the mains or run on a battery, which is internal, of course. So what we did is we set up some netting on a background support, and this image, in fact, is away from the window light, and the light coming in from the netting, in fact, is just that Elinchrom One bouncing off the background white wall, as it were, and kind of coming back through the netting to give us the image. A little bit over lighting going on here because she is too close to the window, the natural light coming through. Or you might have had a reflector board or a secondary light going, but as a rule I would tend to actually shoot this shot, which is more of a silhouette kind of image rather than a kind of light in the back and things, really. Tends to actually get away with a lot of creasing in the body shapes, tends to sculpt the body a little bit more as well. If the client's got a fuller figure, or perhaps a fuller buttock or thigh, it's good ways to actually start to thin and shape the actual client. When we use the word thinning in portrait photography, you know, it's not politically incorrect. My job as a portrait photographer is to make sure that the figure looks the best that it can be. So obviously when I'm doing shots and I've done the questionnaire with the client and they say, look, my partner really loves my butt, I'm going to kind of not just make it look amazing, but I might be making it look a little bit more voluptuous at times. And it'll allow the client to make that decision in the viewing room then, which they kind of prefer. So shaping the figure, shaping the body is the professional photographer's real job. It's not as if I'm a kind of a lifestyle or an editorial photographer where I'm basically there to kind of shoot for shoot's sake. A 50mm lens, wide angle, distort the body, gives more dramatic, super wide angle, 24mm lens or whatever. You know, I'm not there to do that. I'm a portrait photographer, which means inherently in me it's my job to try and help the body shape a little bit better, especially as photographers. We put the clients in really weird positions and it can not look at the best at times. So we need to use a combination of animation and lighting to kind of disguise those. But I think it's a really simple image, especially if you're working in a small space, to be able to actually kind of bounce light off a white wall or white flats to get the light coming through with the tool. Then we go into the best poses, and you may be aware of this is what I refer to as the cat stance. It's a closed cat stance, and it's also a faceless closed cat stance. What does that mean? Well, instead of kind of going on to all fours, so in other words, the two knees and the two hands, in this case, we're using the faceless position, which means we're dropping down onto the elbows to actually almost hide the actual face, which is a great anonymous kind of look and feel to it. The closed cat stance refers to the leg closest to camera position is in front and to protect the groin. Okay, that's why it's in that position where the leg furthest away from camera is slightly backwards. And that will kind of give us this kind of cat stances, as it were. You know what I'm on about. You've all seen a cat kind of stand there and go, but for this, it's designed to bring a little bit more of a 50 Shades kind of eroticism, kind of sensuality, whatever is your thing. But I do love this pose, and it's one of our best-selling poses as well. So I definitely kind of look at repertoire for that for yourself. The Drunken Maiden is basically, it's hard to actually make it look like the client is still alive. Why I don't like the head fully down onto the floor and the arms splayed out like I've seen done a load of times is because at that point it looks like she is drunk. Or even dead kind of thing with it, and that's not a good thing. So by using the hands within the hair and looking like the client is in full control, it means that the pose looks a little bit more natural. If there can ever be a natural pose that is getting the client to lean off the end of the bed. As a rule, I tend to actually use this image where the subject is not with the light but against the light, so against the end of the bed with the light behind them at the 12 o'clock position, camera at the 6 o'clock position, client in the middle of the dial, and they'll kind of be pointing their head and hair towards either the 3 o'clock position on the clock or the 9 o'clock position, depends on which way the bed is positioned and things. Think about hands, fingers and everything else with it. If a client is unshaven under the arms and everything else with it, it is something that is already on the questionnaire about pubic hair and underarm hair. And, if we don't ask these questions, we're close to actually making mistakes by the client going, oh my God, I didn't shave. And then all of a sudden you've taken a few photographs thinking that's their style, when in fact you've wasted too much time. So if I read the questionnaire well from what they've put on there, I'll be able to interpret whether I need to allow the elbows, like we're seeing here, to be opened out away from the head, or we need to change the animation, especially of this right arm visible to us, her right arm as well, in fact. But we would actually take this arm back down towards the hip, or even onto the strap, or even around by the bust. That would be so I could disguise the underarm and things. So this communication pre-session for us is absolutely essential to understand, for the client to kind of really get ready for our shoot. Yeah, and in our advice prior to session, what we refer to dressing for success, we talk about kind of getting ready for the shoot. And we took a long time to actually write the words and kind of choose the pictures to go into it. We deliver it in a brochure, but it could easily be an app and things. But the more info we give to a client in advance, we usually find the greater the success of the shoot. And that also is the same when we're using models. We're looking either for a specific model, or we're fully prepared that the model is either has hair or doesn't have hair. And as long as we know on their statistics that when we're booking them, there's no shock, as it were, then we can actually proceed with the shoot and things really. So when you're booking a client, It's you fitting around them, but reminding them they've got to get ready for the shoot. And the same thing when you're booking a model, that you need to know how they style themselves and things, really, because it might not be the look and feel that you're going for at that stage. The next shot here was a simple vignette to simulate looking through the likes of a keyhole. For me, boudoir photography, comes from the kind of the French salon, and it reminds me of this kind of voyeurism. And many of my photographs, as you know, are clients not looking at camera. I do a few, yeah, but it's mainly in their own world rather than a portrait world where they tend to look at the portrait photographer more. Why is that? I try and allow them to have a story of their own. They might be in my kind of book, as it were, my writings, but as far as their little world in their head is concerned and their expressions and so on, it's really about them. And when I have their partners look at those photographs, I want them thinking about their relationship, not her looking at the photographer and what he or she is thinking at that time and things, really. So for me, the voyeurism is absolutely kind of really works well. Look, I'd forgotten the mirror was still in place, all right? And you can see all the rubbish on the floor, but this is a natural kind of image where we could totally vignette that out, the bottom left-hand corner here, or easier still, of course, just crop it off. This is just a piece of card with holes cut in it, and I'm moving it in front of the lens quite close and things to add that natural vignette and a blackness around the image and things. I'm not a fan of a inverse vignette, so a white vignette. That's where you've got the likes of plastic glass, which funny enough we'll look at in a minute, but plastic glass where you're then actually shining light onto it on the edges. So in other words, you would have a white piece of plastic or scratch plastic with a clear hole in the middle, and because that plastic is being lit, it will actually white out the edges. I'm not a fan of that at all. I don't know why. I just don't really kind of bend towards that kind of style at all and things, really. Don't worry if you're putting images into photo critique or a photo development sessions on the academy. If that's your style, that's okay. I accept it. If it benefits the image, I'll talk about that. If it doesn't benefit the image, I'll also talk about that as well. So again, it is really down to what is right for you as you, and what is right for the client is perhaps a different thing, We all in some way shoot for show and we shoot for dough. In other words, we shoot for our creative spirit, our genie, our little devil that we bring to work, as well as kind of making sure that the client has enough images there that they can actually buy without kind of thought and things. So yeah, the vignette works well. The plastic glass I was on about, this is where it's scratched, but there's no clear hole in the middle. So this is where the light is kind of falling on it. You'll see me at times breathe on plastic and then put it in front of the lens, or breathe on the lens itself to give the hazy kind of look. But in this case, because the backlight is coming through and the cheap kind of plastic that you can get, a 10/8 size from a cheap IKEA frame or something like that, you can scratch up with a Stanley mark knife or whatever and really make it quite bad. And then you can actually put that in front of the lens. You get this lovely hazy effect and things as well. Long are the days where we used to actually use filters on the front of the lens. And we'd actually kind of lacquer them off camera, of course, with the likes of hairspray and everything else to give a different kind of look and feel. Next shot here was the faceless image. So even though we did the faceless with a closed cat, this is a true faceless image. So it could be another favorite pose. I think this really works great against the likes of a wall or a door. It's a fantastic butt shot. Especially when the light is coming in from the likes of the 12 or the 1 o'clock position, where it kind of just kisses the flesh. It just gives a lovely roundness. It gives a highlight on them, so it's a natural thinning, and of course the rest of the flesh visible to camera is going to be in dark shadow anyway, kind of thing. So it really, really does work well. And once more, like I explained on the other image, the faceless image where the chin is just dropped between the arms and you kind of get this anonymous, a very 50 Shades sensuality, fantasy kind of element and things. Well, I would encourage you to, if you're a boudoir photographer that does a lot of images where they're looking at you, I would definitely try and encourage you to actually have some variety where they're not looking at you. Material Girl is a great way to do the implied. Just some great silks that you can get from any pretty much material shop will allow you to kind of add an extra variety into any shoot. It's a great way as well if a client doesn't quite want to go nude, but they do like the idea of a bare back and even coming down to the bum. The silk sheet, white, pink, blue, green, you name it, we had it. But they're a really great way. And if you hold it just like a bathrobe, bath towel, so it basically loops from the back and it comes up to the boobs and it can be held with one hand or both hands. It's a great way to actually get it to shuffle down and kind of just lower and lower and lower till you start to see the crease of the butt and everything else with it. And some really, really beautiful shots of all types of women and all types of figures, I promise you, kind of thing. We usually do ask the client, though, if they have a favorite color. That only applies if they've ticked the color option within our question as well. So they would like some images in color. If they're having some images in color, I can guarantee you the Material Girl image is definitely chosen color based on them. And finally, then, it's the fantasy image, whatever it would be. We chose to do a little bit of a feather. We found bags and bags of these white feathers in the studio cupboard with it. I don't know why we got them, but we just thought we'd start to use them, have a little bit of play. I'd usually do it with the petals because they're quite solid and everything else with it. And obviously, with this kind of image, we have photographs that we can overlay on top of feathers as well that we've shot in advance, so we can kind of place them in a little bit of a better place. But a fantasy image is always a good idea. However, of course, there's always some retouching to do, especially when you're using feathers. Look, if you haven't seen that film already, go over and watch it. It is live, so it's a bit of a laugh as well with it. But thanks for joining me again. I hope you enjoyed the review.